we could have a talk just on that. It's a critical dynamic. It's one that should be front and center when there's a lot of change going on. And we don't always understand what are all the tentacles of the change. What does it mean for my business? Is it going to change again? Is it going to change? Is it going to change in scope? And of course, AI in my career is probably at the top of the list of what does this mean to me in my business? And so I'll just get to a provocative statement here and say, if your organization is extremely risk averse, particularly when you see some force somehow transforming a lot of organizations, and a lot of organizations saying, we're using this, we're leveraging it, we're getting benefits out of it, I'd say two things. If you're going to be real risk averse and play the wait and see game, you're probably never going to ascend the ranks within your industry vertical.
Welcome to the HR Huddle podcast, presented by Sapient Insights Group, the ultimate resource for all things HR. It's time to get in the huddle.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the HR Huddle. I'm your host, Teri Zipper, CEO and Managing Partner at Sapient Insights Group. And we're back for another exciting episode of HR We Have a Problem. This is the show where we break down the big and most relevant HR issues of the day. We help you make sense of what they mean for you, and we talk about what you might do about them. So joining me today is Steve Goldberg. Steve is industry expert extraordinaire. He's been working in HR tech from both the vendor and the practitioner perspective for a while. Let's just say it that way. And he's seen a lot. I mean, a lot has happened, just over the last 25 years. Welcome, Steve. It's great to have you on the show.
Thank you so much, Teri. Thanks for the kind words, and welcome whoever happens to be out there sipping some coffee and listening.
Yeah. We could probably spend a whole show talking about what's changed in the work landscape over the last 30 or 40 years, but it's a lot, right? It seems a little slower when you're in the middle of it, right? But as it's happening, it's like history is happening and we don't really see it. So we may touch on some of that, but I know the things that are important to you, and I know you talk a lot about organizational agility, which I think we need a lot of these days. So I thought we'd go down that rabbit hole today. Mm-hmm. Does that sound like a good plan to you?
It's my favorite topic to speak about, and it's reinforced as my favorite by the fact that the majority of people want me to speak about it.
Yeah. Well, let's get into the huddle.
Okay.
So let's talk about it in a minute. What does organizational agility really mean to you, Steve? And how would you define it for people? How is it different than other things that are, that they talk about and hear about all the time, like change management and the like?
Sure. Well, just picking up on your last sentence, I'll just quickly kind of toss out a phrase I use. Organizational agility and change management are really two sides of the same coin. And I'll come back to that later. But as far as, let me say it this way, why I'm obsessed in a way with the notion of elevating organizational agility. Some years back, as you know, because you're in this group of top tier analysts, advisors, thought leaders, et cetera. And it's great that we're peers in that sense. And so one of the expectations about the 30 or 40 of us in this group, just to pick a number, is that we are kind of saying things that are a little bit different than everybody else is saying, whether it be on the practitioner side or the people in the group themselves. And so I decided 3-4 years ago that I would focus much, much more on the outcomes, namely, I would say needle moving outcomes, strategic outcomes, than I would focus on the means. Does that mean that you'll never see me writing about AI? Definitely doesn't mean that, because I wouldn't have any clients if I never spoke about AI. But strategic, what are the needle moving, game changing outcomes that I came up with this phrase years ago. I had the pleasure of heading up strategy at PeopleSoft. It was my first market facing job, and it was almost 25 years ago. And I thought about, what should my kind of vision pitch be all about? And I realized back then, instead of talking about the latest and greatest features or even platform attributes, I would talk about strategic outcomes. Now, I stayed with that on and off as an orientation of what did I want to be known for when I did talks for vendor clients. But I really picked it up again a few years ago when I perceived, and I'm not the only one that perceived this, the industry, business in general, but certainly HR tech, HCM solutions industry was at a crossroads where there were hundreds of vendors and only a handful, in my opinion, a few years ago, were really thinking about how do we allow a customer to ascend the ranks, not just save money, cost savings, not just be more efficient, or not even just hire the right people and make sure they're in the right place at the right time. That's all important. So I'm not going to diminish any of that. But I've personally never heard of a company that moved up in the ranks within its industry because they saved more money or because they got more efficient. It's helpful, no doubt. Has it ever happened? I'm sure. But what's a more reliable path to ascending the ranks? So I came up a few years ago with what I called, and named it after myself because I'm so immodest. I called it the Goldberg Ascension Test. And the Goldberg Ascension Test was 3 reliable pathways to ascending the ranks within your industry vertical, elevating organizational agility. Why? Because unquestionably, we live in the most fluid, unpredictable, uncertain times. And number 2, and we need to see both risks and manage both risks and opportunities within that operating environment context. Number 2 was being an employer of choice because you're going to be attracting, retaining the top talent. And number 3 was employee productivity. Not talking about efficiency here. I'm really talking about output, impact, and productivity, because even if you just use a metric like revenue per employee and you increase it by 5%, you have a large organization, that's big dollars. So those are the 3 that I've been focusing on the last few years, with elevating organizational agility being the main one. And so the more I get to talk about it, the more I get to kind of expand on my frameworks around it, et cetera. How do I define it? That's a pretty long preamble to how do I define it. So how do I define it? I would say at a high level, it's being out in front of both business risks and business opportunities. But more specifically, it's the ability to know as an organization when you need to pivot operationally, strategically, or technologically. Know when you need to do it, have the confidence and the wherewithal to know that you have to do it, choosing the best path because there's always alternative paths, and then executing well. So it's in essence all about pivoting, and that's the way I define it. I think it's a major strategic and competitive advantage. And clearly there's so many industry examples of those companies that executed well in this regard and those that didn't. I'll just name one of each. I mean, there's literally hundreds of examples. I actually worked for one that didn't, not in the column of executed well on change and change management and organizational agility. It was a short-lived, probably my shortest lived corporate role was 18 months, right before I joined PeopleSoft. And I was hired by the same manager or GM that hired me when I worked in Switzerland as the head of HR tech for a bank. And it was Wayne Huizenga, the late Wayne Huizenga, known for being a founder of 3 Fortune 500s. I'm not sure there's anybody else in that club. And the 3 were Waste Management Inc., Blockbuster, and AutoNation. And so my title was VP of HR M&A for Wayne, late 90s. And Blockbuster, as I said, he founded it. It went well for a while, and then we know what happened. I think there's one Blockbuster store left in the US after there were thousands, and one reason was they got overtaken by a different technology, namely streaming video, but also the business model, I have to say, because it's a fact, it's written about all over the place. The business model was largely based on people incurring late fees. That's not a sustainable business model. So that's an example. Another one that is in the column of didn't execute well is Kodak, also late in terms of adopting new technology and digital technology around their business. On the other side of the coin, the ubiquitous Amazon. Amazon started as a bookstore, right? And they're probably in thousands of businesses now. So they anticipated where the action was going to be, and they pursued it, and they pursued it very well. So that's my long answer to that. Hopefully there's a couple of nuggets and data points in there.
Hey there, I'm Tim Boris, host of the Working Well podcast, where business strategy meets human sustainability. If you're an executive, a leader, or change maker ready to ditch burnout, build thriving teams, and drive real results, this is your next must listen. Tune in on the Work Defined Network or at timboris.com/podcast.
Well, so if I'm listening to this podcast as an HR professional or an HR tech professional, or just somebody who likes to listen to fun and interesting podcasts, what are some of the things they should be thinking about right now in their organization? Because, I mean, the world is changing. I don't know if it's changing any faster than it was in the past. Sometimes it feels like it, depending on your perspective. You feel like you're in the middle of a much bigger upheaval than maybe your peers had experienced in the past or your predecessors. But, and some things do move faster. AI is feeling like it's moving a lot faster than other things in the past. But, what are some of the things people should be thinking about right now, or could be thinking about in terms of how they could have an impact here and make sure that they're acting agile, they're moving in a manner they should be moving? Because I think a lot of people I see are frozen. They're not sure what the next best step is.
Mm-hmm.
They're a little bit tentative about AI. They're using it, but not sort of as a strategic instrument. They're using it as more of it's plugged into my HRIS system. So I'm using it, or I'm using ChatGPT, but I'm not, running as fast as I probably should. And I need to get ahead of it.
Yeah. We could have a talk just on that. It's a critical dynamic. It's one that should be front and center when there's a lot of change going on, and we don't always understand what are all the tentacles of the change. What does it mean for my business? Is it going to change again? Is it going to change in scope? And of course, AI in my career is probably at the top of the list of what does this mean to me in my business? And so I'll just get to a provocative statement here and say, if your organization is extremely risk averse, particularly when you see some force somehow transforming a lot of organizations, and a lot of organizations saying, we're using this, we're leveraging it, we're getting benefits out of it, I'd say two things. If you're going to be real risk averse and play the wait and see game, you're probably never going to ascend the ranks within your industry vertical. And the second thing I'll say is, if you're going to wait until you have, it's kind of correlated with being risk averse, but if you're going to wait until you have all your ducks in a row, and that this is the exact detailed blueprint we're going to follow, you're also probably not going to ascend the ranks, and you may start experiencing a downward trajectory to your business. You're not going to have all the answers. A big part of leveraging new capability is market testing them and testing them internally and tweaking and optimizing. And it's a continuous process. It's not a cyclical process. Yeah. Start slow if you're risk averse, but start. And have 5 areas of the business that you believe can be positively impacted. Start with those, have some ways to measure the impact, but Also understand what are the dependencies to get that impact you desire. And focusing on and emphasizing dependencies is super important. And the number one dependency in any elevating organizational agility or business transformation program, et cetera, is change readiness. So it's getting a lot more attention.
Yeah.
But it doesn't help unless we dimensionalize what we're talking about with change readiness. So it's, of course, the people support. Are they ready? Are they ready for the business to change in one direction or another? Do they think their jobs might be at risk? That's where I think candor and clarity and effective communications comes in. Candor, like we don't have all the answers. We have a good sense that and a reasonable probability we're going to be successful. But as we learn new things about, on this journey, we may make some tweaks. If you are concerned about your role and your job, we understand that because not everything is laid out in a very indelible kind of blueprint here. It's what we know today. It's what we've learned by talking to experts. It's what we've learned from past failures, perhaps. And if you're concerned about your role, just keep one thing in mind. Soft skills are just as important in your career as anything else, and arguably they're even more important today. And one of the most important soft skills is ability to thrive during periods of change. If you have the ability to thrive during periods of change, you're going to be more marketable to the market out there. So that's one point. There's a couple of others here, and then we can move on. Sorry, I'm a little bit kind of reaching into the toolkit here in terms of what my teams learned. Another one I want to convey is in the communications around making a change, and again, the two-sided coin, elevating organizational agility to move up, and then having and executing an effective change management program to be able to be more agile. You can call it an organizational agility blueprint. It's kind of the same thing. But in the communications part of that program, one thing my teams learned was to emphasize the net benefits, not just make it a binary thing. We're going to be very successful, and everything down the line is going to be perceived as a benefit at the macro and micro level. It almost never happens. So emphasize the net benefits. That sends a message that you're self-aware as leadership, as a line manager, and you have empathy. And again, it's candor, clarity, and communications, the 3 C's. Emphasize the net benefits. Yes, there may be a period of a week or two where you have to learn a new product, a new technology, a new kind of approach to the market. If you're a salesperson, you may have to kind of re-engineer your sales pitch. Or if you're customer support, you may have to kind of tweak that quite a bit and learn new ways of dealing with customers. And that's going to take some time out of your day. But the net benefit is we're going to do better as a company. We'll be able to treat you better. We'll be able to invest in your career more, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah. So let's see. Is there one last point? I thought I had one more point here, but I lost it, and I'll come back to it later. Sorry.
Well, I mean, there's definitely new ways of doing things. And as we look at, because we've been doing change management for a long time, as we look at where people fail in the change management effort is one, they fail to see it as an ongoing thing. Yeah. It's not in a package. It's not a project. It's actually, I mean, a better definition of it is being agile as an organization, because there's constant change within the organization. But one of the biggest things that we see from a change management perspective when organizations are doing something big, like say implementing a new technology or transforming their shared services or something like that, is they fail to actually make the change. So it's interesting when you hear people say, we got a new software, but we're still doing things exactly the same way as we did before. Why did we switch? Like, we spent more money. We took a bunch of time to do this. And, we're not really getting any more efficient because one, we didn't really change our process. And, more
Thank you.
often than
Yeah.
not, that's the big nut. It's you've got to do things differently. And that's just not going to happen because we put a new software in front of you.
Thank you for saying that. And because it also triggered what I temporarily forgot before, which was when you have process change, you need behavior change along with it. You need mindset change, process change, behavior change. You need all three. And another very quick point is, if you think about the bookends of change management, it's assess readiness at the front end, and then sustaining the change. And I think what you've been talking about, Teri, here in the last couple of minutes is sustaining the change.
Yeah.
So don't have a victory parade or a party and say, okay, onward and upward. You better have, your key success metrics that are spread out over a period of time, because you're going to have personnel changes. You're going to have new processes, new technology, and you don't want that, you were reaping the benefits of a transformational effort. You want to keep going in the right direction. So you better have the checkpoints and the milestones to do that.
Yeah. The other part to that is if you're not being, if your leadership is not leading by example in this case, then you're not going to need to change, right? Because they're not, they have a huge influence on this and impact the organization's ability to adopt change. I think there's a soft and a hard skill component to that, right? I think you can learn leadership skills, but there's also some component of that, I think, that's innate in people who are really, really good at it. And you see that in an organization when they're going through a change.
You do, and particularly when leadership, whether it be executive team or line managers, people could tell when they're genuine and they're in communicating why we're doing it. And as a real practical example or tip, if you will, and I did a LinkedIn post about this, and basically 6 weeks ago, I started doing a weekly change management tip. And thank you, by the way, because I know you had said some kind things about one of those weekly tips. And yes, it's common sense and widely known that in your communications to the masses in your organization and anybody outside the organization that you collaborate with, that are stakeholders, your customers, obviously, it's common sense to communicate, why are we doing this? But in nuances, why are we doing it now? Why didn't we do it before now? And why aren't we putting it off for 3 to 6 months? So every time you think you nailed it, I'm not saying be OCD about it, but yes, we're communicating the why. Is there any other part of the why story? Just convey broader context and understanding for why we're doing it. But perhaps the secondary benefit of talking about why now is you're getting people to trust you, and you're getting people to respect the fact that you're not snowing them, and you're just telling it like it is.
Yeah. You've talked about data-driven decision making. So I think when we get to the tactical side of this, in order to make this happen and to measure what's happening, we need to be looking at data. What are your thoughts on that? Like, what do you see as some of the key elements of that, and how important is that in this process?
Yeah, thanks. Well, it's a short word, it's a 4-letter word, but boy, it is a big, big, big topic, and it branches into so many other topics. So as an example, perceived reliability, I use the word perceived a lot, perceived reliability of the data. I was at 4 investment banks, 3 in Wall Street and 1 in Switzerland, where my team was responsible for HR tech, deploying HR tech, et cetera. And at the first 2 investment banks, where we had a budget of, quite a few bucks, and we're talking about late 80s through late 90s, I would actually go visit the head of the trading floor, or the head of fixed income, or the head of foreign exchange, investment products or whatever. And I saw the same dynamic. No matter how thought how well we thought we did in articulating, here's the benefits you're going to get from using the new HR system. Some people would use it now and then, but for the most part, everybody maintained their own spreadsheet. Boy, was that really undermining the benefits the organization was getting. They didn't trust people data. And we had to get to the bottom of why. It wasn't until I got to my third investment bank that I learned a lot. My teams learned a lot about what it takes to get people to trust HR data. And one of the nuances on the, or people data, you know, which brings me to my next point about HR versus people data along the same lines. Human capital management, which I define as managing people for competitive advantage, and leveraging, not just managing people for competitive advantage, leveraging what they do in their jobs, leveraging what they could be doing, leveraging their impact on other, colleagues and coworkers, et cetera. Human capital management is not owned by the HR department. I've been saying this my whole career. HR is 1% of the organization, roughly. It has to be owned by everybody. And until the whole company or most of the company buys in, particularly management, levels of management buy into the notion that HCM is owned by everybody, you're not going to kind of crack the code on getting people to trust people data. First, they have to realize they have a role to play in getting people to trust people data, right? So that's one point. I'll make one more point, kind of an adjacent topic related to data is when we come up with technology, when we're leveraging technology that, for example, a skills taxonomy, skills related to other skills related to jobs, and who's the incumbents, et cetera. There are so many tentacles and aspects around this that won't be in that ontology most likely. What's the ramp up time if you don't have the exact skills, but you have most of the skills? What level of proficiency is really needed to be considered a valuable resource? Because you don't need an expert in every role. So this also relates to data. You want to get people to trust your ontology, recruiters to hire based on it, people to invest in training for their teams based on your ontology, then really think it through in a very analytical way and align it with not just the needs, interests, and goals of the organization, but the needs, interests, and goals of the individuals in those roles.
Yeah. This has been a challenge since the beginning of time. That was always in the early days in the 90s when I was selling technology. Nobody had clean data. It was just such a pain. And a lot of that data has been cleaned up, but now the pool has gotten so much bigger.
That's
There's
right.
so much more data.
Yeah, and you also have inferred, or you now have skills being inferred. Again, it's a lot of trust going on. That's necessary.
Or decisions or thinking being inferred, right? Like, hey, this person might be, high on the list of somebody who's looking to leave the organization, right? How do I know that? So that, there's just, there's so much data. And you make a really good point that as employees, we own that data about ourselves. And we do need to take more ownership in making sure the organization has good data on us, especially given the fact that the future is AI is going to be making a lot of those decisions.
Yes.
And AI is no different than anything else. It garbage in, garbage out, right? At the end of the day. So.
Hey, Teri, under the same kind of topic heading, can I tell you 1-minute story you may find entertaining?
Sure.
So the fourth, it's just going to stay indelibly etched in my memory forever. even though it was, I don't mind dating myself. It's always good to be able to date yourself. I would say it was 94 to 98 was the fourth investment bank where I headed up HR tech. They moved my family, my wife and kids and I to Zurich, a suburb of Zurich. It was Swiss Bank Corp right before they merged with UBS. And as anybody knows, when you're on an expat contract, it's typically, time box, it's a 4-year thing. And expats cost anywhere between 2 and 4 times the local because they're paying for housing, putting your kids in school, the move, everything else. So there's thousands of expats on these sort of deals. And there's a lot of pressure on the organization to make sure they're not just pouring money down the drain with their expat program. So my very first week as an expat in Zurich, the head of HR who I reported to said, you're going to go had to go visit his boss in Basel, Switzerland, who was the overall GM for the bank. And I won't mention his name. So I went there. I was excited to talk about, the great and, wondrous things about having a new HR system. He didn't really want to go there. He proceeded to first go to his bar in the office and give me a shot. And we both did a shot of bourbon. It was 10 o'clock in the morning, by the way. And this person is long retired, so he's not going to experience repercussions here. So he says, I'm going to tell you what your group needs to do to be successful. First, we're going to do this shot of bourbon. So we do that. And then he gets a napkin and a pen, and he starts drawing like a tic-tac-toe boxes on a napkin. And he says, very, very plain spoken with a Swiss German accent or German accent. He says, Stephen or Herr Goldberg, if your team at the end of your stay here can with confidence say the number of people in each one of these boxes, you're successful. You just have to know the number of people in each of these boxes to be successful. That's what they moved us to Switzerland for. Now, that was his conception of success.
Yeah.
And you can imagine that was based on decades of a lot of managers wasting time talking about why numbers are wrong. So, sorry. That's my story there.
It's important to know how many employees you have. And again, I remember in my early days, that was one of the biggest challenges. One of the biggest reasons people were buying the technology that we were selling, and it wasn't an HRIS, it was a comp system, but they didn't know how many employees they had, right? So this was their way of tracking them. I was just working with a fairly large organization last year that, they had over 100,000 employees. They did not know how many employees they had because they had so many different
or what they were doing, or
right.
Who was on leave of absence, who was on salary continuance but no longer there. That's all. You know that stuff.
Yeah. And when you grow up through acquisition, you've got multiple HRIS systems, there's just data all over the place. So getting that measurement is pretty challenging. Mm-hmm. Well, that's a good story. I like it.
And hopefully people will still continue to work with me. I don't typically do a shot of bourbon at 10 a.m.
No, that was back in the day. One of my first consulting jobs, I walked into an office that it was a big office. So I was sharing it with like 3 other people, and the wall was a bar.
Yeah.
Because this had been the office of the president of this organization before they got acquired. So needless to say, we, for a while, took advantage of that and filled it a few times, but that quickly went out of favor. Well, Steve, what do you see for the future? Like, are there some, obviously beyond AI or even with AI, what are you seeing as some, emerging trends or some things that are going to maybe have a positive impact on helping us as organizations be, more agile and achieve those strategic goals, right?
Mm-hmm. One thing I'm hoping for, and I feel more optimistic about this change, being on the verge, on the cusp of this change collectively, people that are in HR tech, people that collaborate with us, partners that we have. I think we're on the cusp of going back to what I said earlier, focusing much more on the outcomes than the way we're getting there. The way we're getting there is important, but that's going to change. The way we're getting there is not what's going to transform your business. And as we focus much more on the outcomes and working backwards, if you will, from the outcomes, I think the statistics, and Sapient's one of my favorite companies as far as putting out their kind of stats and research findings that matter with your HR systems survey and everything else. And so I've been a student of reading not just HR tech related stuff, but change management, business transformations, success rates. I know you're totally aware of this from your days at Mercer. Business transformations still by and large, are viewed as not achieving the most important goals. 70% are either underperforming or viewed a few years later as having failed. That's large-scale business transformations. It hasn't changed much in the last 20, 30 years. But I think so many people know this, and it's being given so much attention in industry conferences, for example. And I'm speaking on, I just heard I'll be talking about this at Unleash, along with about 50 other people talking about the same thing. Enough attention is being brought to bear on why business transformations are underperforming or failing, why transformations, change management exercises, not really as big as a big transformation, why they are underperforming or failing. And a lot of it has to do with the stuff we're talking about. Lack of reliable data, lack of confidence in the data, not focusing enough on soft skills like ability for people to trust you have their interests, ability for people to thrive during periods of change. So I think we're on the cusp of the success rates going up. Would it be significant in the very near term? I doubt it, but we'll be inching up as long as we keep bringing attention to the dependencies. And that's a lot of what we've been talking about in this call.
Yeah, I completely agree. Well, there's a lot to look forward to, I think. Let's put it that way. So thank you, Steve, for joining me today. This has been great. Really
My
been
pleasure,
a
Teri.
fun conversation.
Yeah, you probably weren't prepared for the bourbon story, but maybe you could edit that out if you like, no problem.
No, I think a lot of people can relate to that. I want to remind people that the annual HR systems report is out there, but you are probably, if you haven't already, gotten an email to participate this year. So look for an email from your vendor or ask them if they are participating in distribution. If not, you can go to our website and do that. And also be sure to listen to Stacy and Cliff next week while they spill the tea on HR tech. I know that's one of your favorite topics, Steve.
Well, not just that, but two of my favorite, I'm not just saying it, two of my absolute favorite people in the industry, Stacy and Cliff. I worked with Stacy 15 years ago, and Cliff is a very, very warm, kind person, very smart. They're both very smart.
Yeah, they're good beans. So I also want to thank our producers, Brand Method Media Group, Kelly's team, our marketing team, Summer, who does a great job of getting this out there to you guys. And thank you for tuning in. That's all the time we have for this episode of HR We Have a Problem. If you enjoyed the episode, you can subscribe to it on your favorite podcast app. Leave us a review if you have a minute. We'd love to hear what you want to talk about on this show. We'll be happy to talk about those things. I'm sure we can find all kinds of people who want to talk about those topics. So let us know. We will be back in 2 weeks with another episode of HR We Have a Problem. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.